Alright, so this is going to be probably a rather short segment this time around. Definitely not a 2-hour speech like some of the other ones I've talked about for builds. But in any case, I have finished up, as I posted on Reddit, wheel drones of the professional tier today, July 27th, 2021. So I finished this trial up, so I now have no remaining professional tier stuff, so it's going to be kind of hard unless you once again just trust me on this, but basically anything with professional in the name, i.e. anything that is of the special tier, is complete, and then I did also complete anything below the tier of special tier as well. So yeah, I basically have the first 3 rows of all weapon trials complete, which is pretty exciting, seeing as how that's basically what I've been doing. So just to make sure that I get a good handle on the game and all the different weapons and whatnot, I basically complete the trials for each of them, which requires some miscellaneous patches which normally don't really relate to the trial specifically, and I have most of them even for like some of the, for instance, relic challenges. I'm trying to think of which one was the newest category to come out. So here's a good example. So Legend of the Kaiju just came out last Battle Pass, and I haven't used this weapon a whole heck of a lot, so I've only gotten, what is that, like 74 kills or assists with it, and yet I have all of these other patches done. The only one that I'm missing is killing Wheel Drone Owner while the drone was protecting him, and I can get that done at any point up to and including when I get this challenge finished. So most of the time I just basically have the weapon challenge itself to get done with, and I mean, because I'm not aiming for any specific trial like back to back to back to back or anything, I think that probably helps me, because some of these ladder trials, for instance, would be rather rough if you were just trying to work up the tier. So for instance, if somebody decided that they wanted to spec into specifically machine guns, they could do the you know, the common, rare, special, epic, legendary, relic tier, and on top of that, taking like increasingly long with each tier to complete due to the number of patches required going up, as well as the variety of patches. So for instance, the flame weapons require you to destroy enemies after death, whereas most other ones don't. You're going to be kind of hyper specialized in that, and that might restrict your ability to complete other ones. So if you, for instance, did that and got all the machine guns done, then you might have to, when you go to like shotguns or cannons, do some of those trials, such as like getting damage with blast damage. So basically what I did when I came back, basically June, July of last year, is I just started working on the trials row by row. So I got the 3 white ones, the cannon, shotgun, and machine guns, pretty much already done, I think, by the time I was gone. I think by the time I got back, just as a result of mucking about with them as a new player. I think there's also a common one, which is just using bumpers for melee. So that is technically a tier as well, although it doesn't show up in the chart because there is no, you know, common melee weapons. It's just bumpers and whatnot, which, funny enough, are actually of the base tier, because all structural parts are. So a bit of a mismatch there, I guess. But in any case, it is also technically the only base weapon trial. Fun fact. Yeah, so I've just been going row by row. So I focused on blue weapons, and then cyan, epic, etc. as I came across them. So there's obviously some conditionals on that, because for instance, I just finished up the final cyan tier item, and I already have most epic and even some legendary trials done. And the reason for that is I've been basically avoiding the drones category like the plague, because most people already don't feel too super hot about them because they're low skill, but because of that, they also have a low skill ceiling, which is you can't really do a whole lot with them to improve your odds. You basically just make a build and try and guide the AI to success as best as possible, which is of course somewhat difficult when you don't have any actual interaction past summoning the drones, driving around and hoping they lock onto who you want, and desummoning them if you want. So basically avoided that category, but I'm now at the stage where I have all the other epic tier and below trials complete. So I just have the mines, the kings, and this was a new trial. I did originally have king mines a while ago, but they didn't add the trial for mines until rather recently. I want to say a couple of seasons ago. So I already have all of these again, but for instance, I don't have any kills with them, even though if you were here or saw me play like a year ago, I definitely, you know, got kills with the king. Maybe not 800, the amount needed for the trials completion, but quite a few in any case. And then I got rid of them because they didn't have a trial, and then now they have a trial, so I picked them back up again. So I got those, and then I got drones. So now I'm down to basically actual drones, that is the copter ones, which includes both the MD3 Owl and the Yaoguai, and then turrets, which is literally just the RT Anaconda, because the Barrier IX is counted under not turrets, much the same way as, so for instance here, you can see the barrier is not counted on it. Fun fact, it was temporarily, it is not anymore. Likewise, how the... That's not even going to show me here. I'm pretty sure, I haven't actually tested this before, but I'm pretty confident in saying that the Enlightenment isn't counted as a uncategorized melee, or uncategorized epic weapon. Yeah, it's not. Which makes sense, because they're not actually weapons. Likewise with the Skinner, it's not actually a weapon that deals 0 damage. They're basically utility options in the quote-unquote uncategorized weapon. What I'd like is to see these things that don't actually have a trial of their own get actually popped into hardware, like the Aegis Prime or the Argus are, because then I could use them with the Yaoguai, which deals increased damage for every point of hardware. But you know, alas, 'tis not to be. At least in the current state, they are still counted as weapons. So in any case, that's kind of a rundown on like me doing trials in general. Couple of benefits to this I might as well list since I'm going over it. So because I'm working from the bottom up, basically the next trial I'm working on is always going to be the cheapest trial to complete in theory. So for instance, because all of the blue items are about $100 to $200 and you could slap on like 2 to 3 onto a build comfortably, it would only, you know, cost me $400 or $500 to get all those items to make a build out of it. If I were to go vertically and go, for instance, through the melee, it would be probably like $600-ish for this tier, and then the next tier it would be about 3 times that, and then the next tier it would be more than that, and then harvester is like, what, 7,000 per harvester, and you'd probably want 1 or 2 of them on there. So yeah, benefits for cost, and then I also like to think it kind of familiarizes me with the game a little bit more, because I basically have progressed through the power score lobbies. So obviously I was playing at very low power scores basically all the way through while I'm working on stuff, and now I am basically just starting to peak into the like 10,000 power score lobbies, although admittedly most of these builds here I haven't used in PvP. I do plan on using the crab clone one, but the Siegebreaker is mostly a raid machine, because it uses the tacklers, and I have finished the trial for those. Goliath Soup is basically just a fun test build. The Dreadnought is a build I'm currently developing, and again I have the rocket launcher for the Snowfall challenge done. Which, fun fact, I actually did this challenge. It was actually one of the first ones I did with the... I'm gonna have to scroll for a bit here. With the Clarinet Toe. Of course, it doesn't let me highlight over it. But anyway, so I started playing in it was either June or July of last year, 2020, and I completed the rocket launcher epic tier in August, late August, because I was using the Clarinet Toe alongside the Caucasus to basically have a build that was like semi-able. I don't want to say AFK, but basically one that was able to focus on driving. So I used the the Carapace cabin, which is one of the reasons I'm a fanboy for it, with the Goliath tank tracks. I used the Clarinet Toe for active hunting, and then while I was in the drone, or sorry, rather controlling the rocket, I was able to use the Caucasus to just attack threats nearby. So that means I also had the machine gun trial here, also done extremely early into my return. Yeah, which is why, like I said, I've just had tacklers the entire time because they're relatively cheap and effective, so I've just been using them as raids up until this point where, like last week, I just got the crab clone, the cyclones for him, but I'm still going to keep them around just until I decide to basically scrap these builds, which is, you know, more possible the longer I hold on to the crab clone. But in any case, the siege breaker is kind of the definitive like bronze break build, so I'll probably hold on to that indefinitely. But in any case, as far as the topic of drones, so I figure now that I'm actually, you know, done with them, basically, I think it's worthwhile to kind of point out a couple of, I don't want to say tips because this isn't normally like an informative, like how to get good at the game streaming that I do, but I figure it might as well be worthwhile to just say, you know, the sort of things I found useful for these. So to go through them to begin with, I'm actually going to go through it like this, just for what I did for him. I honestly couldn't even tell you what I did for the blue tier, because that was ridiculously long ago. Yeah, so August of last year again. I'm just going to assume I probably used the call cabin and slapped like 2 or 3 of them on the build, but I honestly couldn't tell you more than that. And because you only needed like 400 kills / assists and you're fighting extremely other lower level people, I'm not going to be able to give you a specific reference for what I did for the build. But in general, I do know with these I kind of followed a certain formula, which I'll get to in the upcoming tier. So obviously for the Cyan tier, you only have one option of each. You have to use the Python, you have to use the Sidekick, and you have to use the Hawk for their respective turret, wheel drone, and drone challenges. So those are pretty straightforward, and again, I just followed the same sort of formula. So what that was is basically I would spend about 8 energy on the weapons themselves, so I always wanted to have at least 2 of them, and then I'd use the rest for support modules. So this is a good example because even though I have a legendary drone on here, it's the same thing. It's 4 energy, and in theory a variant of this, which I will get to showing later, is just that and then some armor slapped up so I can get closer to the 6,500 power score barrier. So yeah, it's basically, I say use the rest of the energy, but basically I was only wanting to use the light or medium cabins max energy of 12. I didn't want to slap any generators on because, as I said earlier into the stream, the autonomous weapons are already considered pretty weak, and I don't want to make my build more potentially destructible from enemies, especially because I don't really have any direct way to defend myself. I'm reliant on the drones distracting and or killing them, which again, they are not necessarily as good as is somebody aiming a gun. So in this specific example, what I have is the call cabin, which has increased power and vehicle resistance, while a drone, wheel drone, or turret are summoned. Of note, this recently got nerfed to 35% from 50% for the cabin power. Whether or not that was reasonable, I don't know. I feel like I have a pretty good handle on the build, having done, like I said, most of those trials, but I feel like dropping it by the 33.3 repeating whatever percent-ish of it was somewhat unnecessary because it's just a power increase, and unless you're running like a lot of them, you aren't even going to get that full benefit anyway. So for literally all of these builds, I only ever had 2 active. So I don't think it's terribly reasonable, especially because the call can only max out at 102 kph anyway, even with a cheat engine. It's not like you're going to be outrunning a whole lot of stuff. But in any case, they did it, and I don't suspect they're going to change it. So, c'est la vie. For the remaining 4 energy that isn't the weapons, quote unquote, I would end up using a cheetah engine, which increases the cooldown of modules, drones, and turret cooldowns. I used a wall hack radar in order to make the drones more effective at finding their foes, or when we get to this super special part about the assembler, do something quite interesting. A carjack, because again, I am basically defenseless by myself when my drones aren't nearby, and even when they are nearby, they're pretty easy to destroy. So I wanted a way to be able to quickly traverse the map, and if I ended up getting stuck, not having to wait the 30 seconds nor have to defend myself while I'm laying on my belly. So that brings it up to 11 energy. For the last energy point, I used a cloak, which makes sense because I'm using the cheetah to buff the reload speed of the devices anyway. I'm using the Bigfoot wheels to boost the cheetah's radius, so I may as well also slap on a module, and of course having Chameleon is just, I almost want to say they're overpowered, but apparently they used to cost 2 energy and are now 1 energy, so they were nerfed in half or something like that. But they still seem pretty crazy, useful for being able to cloak yourself for 10 seconds. Unless you're driving extremely close to an enemy, they're not going to be able to see you. And I mean, they're basically ubiquitous on pretty much like every build other than like sniper or super heavy ones that move ridiculously slow and would benefit from, you know, going invisible while they move like 40 feet. But in any case, super useful because, again, I get that boost from the engine, and because I'm relying primarily on my drones to keep me alive, it's useful to be able to just drop them and leave an area. Or in the case of the Sidekick or Annihilator, which require direct line of sight, i.e. if I move far enough away, they will come back to me. It's obviously, dang, I keep running into these guys. It's very useful to be able to stick in nearby buildings or nearby open areas, other when you get shot at by other bots, to, you know, keep the weapons locked on them. So yeah, that's basically it. I mean, you could tool around with different stuff. I mean, if you're using like the growl cabin or anything smaller, you could obviously cut one of the modules. I would probably say the carjack can just make your build less likely to tip over. Likewise, you could get rid of the Bigfoot wheels and run the Hermit wheels or any sort of smaller wheels. It's a pretty scalable build, and yeah, that basically worked. Like I said, I don't have like perfect recollection of it, but I'm pretty sure that's what I would have done for basically all of these top 5. So we get into a different sort of scenario once we reach, also technically the Annihilator, although I'll get into that a little bit more. So for once you hit the Epic tier, you do have a couple of options for a couple of them. So unfortunately, the RT Anaconda that is still the only turret, because as I mentioned earlier, the barrier does not count towards that challenge. For wheel drones, you have the option of the Fuze or the Grenadier. The Grenadier is just basically the Sidekick with a grenade launcher, but I don't like hanging around enemies, especially when, once again, I'm reliant on my autonomous weaponry to deal damage. So I just ended up using a Fuze with the Werewolf cabin. I did make what was called the Boombox build, or at least I self-labeled it that. I don't think it's on the exhibition anymore. No. But I did have another video for Twitch, so I'll have to upload that at some point and just kind of point towards that. But in any case, it was very similar. I had 2 fuses, I had a cheetah engine, I had a cloak, I had a wall hack radar, I had a carjack, and yeah, I think that's all the energy. But that was basically it. I used it with the Werewolf cabin, so I could also get the after death contributions with it, because if you look at wheel drones, the Werewolf cabin, the drone that it drops after death counts towards that as well. So I, you know, also use that because why not? Just found that a lot easier because I can basically drop and pop. The cool thing about Fuze drones, which I don't actually own anymore since I sold them like 20 minutes ago, is if I can find one that has a wheels and a wall hack radar. Excellent. Okay. Wow, that is a lot of drones. So the really cool thing about these guys is they will just path to enemies regardless of if you're within range or not. So if I go way over here where there isn't anybody and I just pop them, they're still going to path off to something within range. So I guess that wasn't far enough in range, bad example. Although that one was off, so good example. Just going to do this one instead. Okay, so if I drive out of range and I trigger them, they can't path to anything because they aren't within range. If a hostile approaches, or if, for instance, I piss off one of these spots, then they leap into action and do their little kamikaze job. So that's useful in and of itself. The additional benefit, as you could probably have seen with where I summoned them the first time, is if you summon them close enough to an enemy and then just leave the area, they're still going to path towards the enemy. So it doesn't need continued radio contact, to my knowledge. And if it does, then it can probably benefit from other enemies nearby, or even right now you can see on the map the enemies are still technically within range, they just weren't pathing there from the get-go when I summoned them over here. So pretty useful in that regard. It's literally just drive around as fast as possible and then drop and pop them. So the cheetah engine with Bigfoot wheels is again crazy helpful, just for being able to effectively keep a constant stream of them going. Now it's also worth mentioning in my eyes that they buffed them recently. So oops, the drones for the most part just have a base ammunition of 4. So 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. And when you use a Genesis module, which increases the count by 25%, you just go from 4 to 5. So you're slapping on a special item. At least it doesn't cost energy, but it is an explosive for 1 extra drone. And that's kind of, you know, I mean, it's aight, but it's not great. But the Fuze drone actually starts with 6 pieces. So you have more to start with, which is obviously fantastic for the sake of them being expendable drones. They literally just drive somewhere and blow up once immediately. And interestingly, if you use them with the Genesis, with just a single Genesis, it goes to 8 because the rounding of 1.5 gets, well, sorry, with 25% more of 6, you get 1.5, and that rounds up to 2. So with a single Genesis, you get 2 additional Fuze drones, which brings you to 8 per module total. So that's pretty neat. The turret challenge I haven't completed yet. I presume I'm probably going to run something very similar to this build for the RT Anaconda. I still haven't figured it out. I don't know if I'm going to try anything else different with it, but that's probably the first route I'm going to go and take a stab at it. I literally have never owned the Anaconda or given it a go, so we'll see. The other one I haven't completed, although I do kind of have an inkling on what to do with it, is going to be the epic tier drones, so the actual copter ones, which is going to be the Owl, which is one that just hovers near the build, just like the Hawk and the Falcon, or the Yaoguai, which is a drone yeeter, which basically, you know, sends them away before they do their job. So this is another example of a fire and forget. I might end up going this route just for the sake of it being kind of like the Fuze rounds, where I can effectively just do a drive-by, shoot them, and continue on with my day. That being said, there are a couple of disadvantages now with the engine rework. I had originally a oppressor engine in here, which allowed me to go, I think it was 82 kph, a little bit faster than the 13% max cabin speed of the Hot Red. In any case, it gave me tonnage, which isn't really relevant on this specific build, which by the way is supposed to be a coupler build where I'm supposed to have the back half of a bus and another 2 Yaoguai, but whatever. Even if I reorganize this, it would probably, you know, cut off some wheels just because 6 seems unnecessary. It would probably be rather similar insofar as running the equipment of the Echo, the gas stuff, the engine, and then the weapons, which again doesn't require me to use a generator, which is preferable in my eyes. So beforehand, you could have the oppressor engine. It would give you 30% reload speed as long as you're traveling at above 80 kph. This build goes above 80 kph with the oppressor engine, I believe. So let me, if we ignore the perk, yeah, 82 kph, so it triggered the full bonus, which was originally 30% reload speed. So it was really nice because on top of those bonuses, it has a 10% additional max cabin power. So I was able to, you know, rev up quite a bit faster, and then shoot, and then I basically, once I got up to speed, I would basically have a permanent 30% speed boost for reloading, and then another 50% whenever the ability was active. So I was able to get multiple sets of drones up at a time, whereas right now I can't, even with the 10% reload booster, and mind you too, I do also get, you know, the 10% less vehicle power, the 4% less max cabin speed. If I wait for the ability to charge, and I fire, trigger the ability, wait for it to reload. I can like barely get the drones down before the other ones disappear. So interesting thing to note with this actually is the drone activation time starts from where it landed, not when you fired it. So you can actually send it super far. I'm gonna actually get up to speed before we do this, just as an example. Actually, I don't need to get up to speed. Yeah, it should be fine. So if I shoot this as far as possible, and then activate my speed bonus, then you'll see whereas before I just was able to set them down, basically when I got over here, it's going to be like second, basically the amount of travel time it took to set them up, where they're now sticking around. So that's cool, although you would have to alternate being far close. So how much, viability there is actually in that, I don't know. But that's an option, and then once I get my flywheel built, I'm going to try it with that. So that'll give me a plus 20% permanent boost. That doesn't require any additional energy compared to the oppressor, although it requires additional mass and space, yada, yada, yada. But on the plus side, I do also get the plus 50% reverse speed of wheels, which isn't relevant on most of my builds, but is anyway on this one, since it is, of course, using the Bigfoot wheels. And that being said, me using Bigfoot wheels is literally just stylistic choice for artistic choice, I guess you could say, for being a bus build. And having large wheels, you could and probably should not use Bigfoots on this, but you can. And like I said, the hot red lets me back up, which is pretty convenient, since obviously it is a extremely large vehicle, and turning around is, difficult, especially when you add another, full mass of this vehicle again on the back. So have a couple of options there. If I don't like how the Yaoguai ends up feeling, especially if the combo build doesn't end up working and I don't really like how the solo build works, then I might end up just using the MD3 Owl again. So an interesting thing about these drones, the Annihilator less so, because it, for those who aren't aware, you basically send it out to go attack a enemy of your choice. So for instance, these guys I summon, they do their job. If there's anything within range that they can detect, they'll go fight it, as long as they can stay within radius of me. So, pretty useful. The Annihilator doesn't do anything by default. It just kind of vibes. You have to actually actively send it out to somebody for it to actually, do its job. So that's going to be kind of the exception to what I'm just about to talk about. But basically, it's important to note that the Annihilator doesn't really give a shit what you as the user are doing, as long as you are still within range, as I showed earlier. And the interesting thing about using wall hack radar is it lets me do this and still have it engaged. The drone has a little bit worse of a time with it, just due to the nature of line of sight, because it has to be far enough away from me to see the enemy and not have anything else that's distracted by, while also being able to attack the enemy. Whereas with the Annihilator, it's again more of a fire and forget. As long as I'm lurking somewhat nearby, I can be behind any sort of cover or distance within that radius, and it just doesn't care. It'll stay locked onto that one target. So very convenient. Definitely killed a lot of people semi-stealthily that way. Such as kind of a cool aside about the drone for the Annihilator. Now, the quote-unquote disadvantage of the Annihilator will be brought up when I'm talking about the other flying drones. Just to actually show you what I had for a example build, I did start off with having 2 Annihilators, so you can actually see I have a second one in my inventory here that has not received any love for a very long time. And drones are annoying because they need to have clearance above them, so you can't even like block off 1 pip, or they won't fire at all until that is gone. So on the plus side, I'm not going to say plus side, at least the game is consistent, so it is likewise for the drones for the Yokozuna and the cohort. If you block them, they won't launch. If you try and do something with the Argus, it won't launch if it's covered, etc. But I think it's funny enough too, because with the cohort and Yokozuna, I want to say it actually blocks you from using the ability on yourself either, where they both have the ability to use it on nearby teammates, but I think it just literally like completely locks the ability off, which is kind of annoying. Actually, I can test that really quick here. So this is the cohort. It has the drone, which optionally boosts teammates if they're nearby enough, and otherwise it just boosts me. So if I block off drone, doing a semi-terrible job here. Excellent. So partially blocked off. I don't actually think it is. Okay, so it does actually let me trigger, which is nice. I know beforehand it wouldn't, which is extremely annoying because it means I wasn't able to buff myself. So I'm glad they fixed that. Or maybe I'm just remembering wrong, but I could have sworn that it would literally prevent you from using the ability, likewise with the Yokozuna. But they did kind of have, it's like a semi-ninja patch. They said what they worked on, but they didn't actually list everything they did. So for instance, I know beforehand, yeah, see, so this is blocked, and this doesn't actually let me use my ability to speed up myself, never mind speeding up others. So, looks like it's still active for the Yokozuna as a restriction, but not the cohort. Weird. Well, it's, you know, the start of something good at least. But, yeah, so they're kind of annoying. You can't just double stack them like I can with the drones or the turret boxes. So that's a big concern when you're trying to run multiple, especially if you're trying to be a rather compact build. You basically have to end up putting them side by side at best, or front back at, you know, at worst. Well, I guess side by side is actually worse, because what happens is I had a much wider front of the vehicle here, so I moved these fenders out, I moved the frame out, etc. And then the build was kind of V-shaped, which gave me some difficulties with driving. But I did end up realizing I could work on the Sidekick and the Annihilator challenge at the same time, so that's why I ended up doing them that way. I only had one Annihilator exposed, and as a result I only had, you know, the limited width of the vehicle. So this is basically the format I used, more or less. Like, stuff got shuffled around, like I said, but for most of the objects. Likewise, when I was finishing up the Sidekick, I did consider doing a Tusk build, because that way I could still perform a more active role of dealing damage, and I'd actually be able to finish off enemies once the Sidekick like damaged them a little bit, because they don't need to do like a significant amount of damage to the enemy for it to count. It's just like, it's destroy or help destroy. So if they deal 1 damage to them, if they fire once and then you destroy them with the Tusk, obviously that works. And in the case of the Tusk, I was still able to roll around at a very high speed, and I wouldn't need to stick around like the Cerberus. I was just able to do hit and runs. I think I already cleared the blueprint in any case. But still like the call overall. And so the final build version looked like, I'm just gonna quick load it. That instead for finishing up the Sidekicks, so I just had them double stacked, and then I added on some additional armor here, but otherwise it's very similar to the build I just had on screen. So yeah, that was most of these items. So the other thing that I was kind of alluding to earlier is you can actually do something very unique with the Owl and the Hawk and the Falcon, because they stick to you, kind of like the Annihilator before it's launched. Now, if I had any of these, I would just demonstrate them, but I won't. So I'm just going to give a example a la my build, and then I will, my current build, and then I will go on the exhibition to see if there are any, well, better examples of what I'm trying to showcase. So if I summon both of these guys, and one is at a radically different height, you'll note that they end up hovering the same height at about the level of these catwalks. And if I have them on the same height, they perform similarly. They're pretty much a fixed distance above the ground as the Annihilators, although they do zip around in different places, especially when there's zapping stuff, I presume, just as a, you know, defense mechanic to prevent themselves from being shot down. Now, the other drones are interesting because they'll launch a specific height above your build. So I'm not 100% sure if Annihilators showcase the same behavior based off of me having the varying height for them and them going to the same distance. I don't think so, but if they base it off of frame height or cabin height or whatnot, we might actually see a difference. But basically for the other drones, the Annihilator, the Hawk, sorry, not the Annihilator, but for the Hawk, the Owl, and the Falcon, if you have a significantly taller build, like for instance the Big Rams, which are pretty much the tallest that you can make your build normally, they would cause the other items to be launched higher. So it looks like in this case it does not, and you can see even if I change height, the drones are staying at effectively the same height. But if I try and find examples of these guys, say a low level one, so I'm not even going to attempt to estimate, like, or pretend that I'm actually going to have some legit way of checking this, but it looks like it's at about the green banner on this middle pillar by spawn. And if we go to a significantly higher build, and I don't know if people have done this before. Oh, well, this should be a good enough example. Yeah, it looks like it's a little bit higher. So if I can find an extremely low build. Although honestly, I don't think there's going to be one that's smaller than that. Basically what I'm getting at is, I believe, and it's kind of hard to test now since I got rid of the drones, but I was under the impression, at least, that when you have a drone, the height it hovers is... Yeah, here's a great example. So the higher off the ground you are, the higher the drone ends up hovering. So if you have an extremely high build, in this case, which is possible, a la the Fusion build, or in the example I was explicitly going for, which was using a big ram build, your drones are higher off the ground and thus safer for the sake of most weaponries, only being able to aim up to a certain limited amount. Like I wouldn't even be able to hit this guy who was hovering above me as an enemy. Actually, I think I could with the Aurora. Although, again, this Aurora and even the Cyclone are mounted much higher than on most other builds. They're basically safer in extreme close combat, especially against shotguns are notable because they kind of just shred drones. Likewise, the Flash or Spark Tesla guns do a really good job because they auto-lock on to anything within range, and having a drone significantly higher in the sky, in theory, could mean that your build is a lot safer, your drones are a lot safer from being destroyed. So if I did end up having a build that was using the Owls rather than the Yaoguai, I would probably look at going about it this route, having one that's extremely tall, and then having the drones deploy, and again, this is probably a poor example due to the Annihilators being Annihilators and not drones or Hawks, but then having them always hang nearby me. So let's see if I can actually find a big ram build. Phenomenal. Excellent. Okay, so if you have an extremely high build and you're running around on big rams, then your drone is basically going to be rather high in the sky and difficult for the drone to shoot. The interesting thing about these drones too is I think that the quadcopters are always going to stay with you almost regardless of your speed, so the sidekick is going to So the sidekick meanders around at whatever speed it can actually manage, which means if you end up going rather fast, you do run a risk of outpacing him. So if I pop this guy while we're in range, obviously it's going to just fight stuff other than when I do that, and it gets in my way. Excellent. So it's just going to fight stuff, whatever's close by, and then if I leave the radius, it's going to ignore the enemies and start pathing towards me, which is somewhat unfortunate. And as you can see here, other when I get stuck on stuff, you can actually outrun them. Which, you know, makes it kind of difficult to use them to kill things if they're so busy focused on catching up to you and not actually attacking the enemy. So, as you can see, even with the Annihilator there as an example, the drones do a much better job of actually tracking. Oh, this is a perfect example. Alright, so this has a Annihilator and another drone as well as wheel drones. So we can actually see how the Annihilator and the other drone function as well as the wheel drones. So it does look like they hover at about the same height. And you can see this is a slower build using the Omnibox rather than the Call. So this doesn't actually quite do a good job of outpacing the wheel drones. But in any case, the regular drones do a much better job of keeping up to speed. Let's see if we have a faster cabin here. A lot of people running the Omni box. Alright, and this one goes, what, 90? Where's your engine? Oh, you have no engine. This one should get pretty up in speed, though, compared to the Omni. Yeah. So the wheel drones are able, or sorry, the regular drones are able to keep up basically no sweat. Whereas the wheel drones have those issues, and then of course because they're always by you, they're always going to target whatever is within range. So the only potential concern is having to stay within range to make these things work. So again, the fire and forget of the Yaoguai, in theory, serve me a lot better, just like the Fuze drones. So I'll see if I can end up getting that school kid cannon quote-unquote build working. I'm going to just try, see if anybody has one with boosters. See if we can actually outrun them. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. What about the lower tier one? Lower tier booster. Which I think is called the Blast Off. Excellent. Alright. So if I do this, summon that, get up in speed. Yeah, it doesn't look like they have any problem even going over the vehicle speed limit of 120 kph. Let's see if there's maybe something else that can go faster. Yeah, so they're just being tethered a static distance away from me, it looks like. Maybe some sort of spring arm. Obviously they get closer if I slow down and a little bit further away if I speed up, but it doesn't seem like I could ever actually use them even when I'm traveling almost 200 kph, which is much faster than you'd reasonably be going anyway in combat. So yeah, I think that's a good example of that. I think the only other thing to mention, because this is basically a stream, like I said, I was just looking at explicitly talking about drones, is I'm going to just kind of show what I might end up doing for the Yaoguai build, since I of course have the school kit camo, but I do also have a sort of versatile base platform which I can kind of work off of and make different builds for that are reload based, which again I've been primarily avoiding reload weapons since the rework. So the King Mines don't really need them since they already have a really quick reload time. The turret does not need it, and only the Yaoguai needs it, but the Yao does not. So those are the remaining epic trials I have, and basically 2 out of 3, arguably 3 out of 3 don't even need them. But for legendary weapons, the ones that don't use reload that I still have to do are the Retcher, the Cyclone, and then the shotguns, presuming I don't go with the Nidhogg, which I would have originally because it seems a lot cooler, but c'est la vie. And then after that, I'm going to be on to all the lovely reload-based legendary weapons. So at that point, I might have to end up picking up and actually using reload boosters, unfortunately. Though, I guess too, I could use the Draco instead of the Mandrake, but the Mandrake just seems ridiculously cool, so even if it's not effective, I might want to give it a go. So, for the build that I have, why is it saying green? Yeah, that makes sense. So, I do have the Autoloader, and I did speak about, well actually here's an example of why the mine build doesn't even need a reload booster. So this is me running a generator, unfortunately for me, 4 of the King Mines, and then a Golden Eagle engine in order to get to the max speed this cabin can basically do anyway, which is 70 kph. I think it's 72 if I take off these tracks and use something higher speed, but in any case it's extremely close. So I'm not too worried about going much faster in any case. But I do not use a reload booster on the build because I feel like mine's already doing a pretty good job of reloading. Like, I haven't seen anybody need a reload faster than that, especially because of the time it takes to sit down and then have them trigger and then detonate, and the fact that if you sit down more than 2 sets on one at a time, it just starts replacing the earlier one. I literally have never seen anybody need to go faster than the base reload speed on these, so I'm not too worried about it on it. Now, for the modular reload base build, and again, I did go over this beforehand, it's just my remaining builds during the Twitch streams, which again, I have not re-uploaded the VODs for. But in any case, this is my very basic reload platform build. Now, I did just redo it, I think literally 2 nights ago, so it is a little different than what I had during that stream, but in any case, the functionality is the same. It's just basically been updated to take into account reload boosters. So the simple version of it is I made this in order to do the Arothron, the epic shotgun trial, which was something where I figured having a fast reload speed would be very important. So I ended up taking the Echo cabin, and at the time using a Colossus engine, and now using the Hot Red engine, which is currently a basic reload booster, and then the epic one once it's crafted, but effectively allows me to pop off as many shots as frequently as possible. So yeah, I know a lot of people hate on the Arothron, and I don't think they're wrong to do so because you're very reliant on the Goldilocks zone. That being said, if you can manage to hold it, it does a lot of damage. So they're cool in that regard. And anytime I have like another trial for stuff, this isn't a bad platform to use. So for instance, when the Syndicate trials are something like get rocket launcher destroys, or attack with lunatic weapons, or both in the case of one of the weeks, then I can just slap on a couple of crickets, get rid of the additional energy cost items. And voila. And mind you, I get these done against bots because I already have all the trials for them complete, and I'm just doing the challenges for Syndicate. So it's not really anything where I care about making a super viable build against other players. I just need to make it semi-bot viable, which is effectively the entire purpose of this build. There are a couple things, like I said, I would like to upgrade on it, namely the... Oops. Namely the reload booster. So I currently only have the plus 10% the discharger, but I do have the flywheel getting built and being done here relatively soon, which is plus 20%. So that'll be cool. And I would ideally like to upgrade the hovers, but that comes with a couple drawbacks. So yeah, so for informational purposes, originally I had the Colossus because it performed the function of both the Hot Red and the Flywheel, that is an engine and a reload booster. And that allowed me to, of course, the armor looked a bit different because of the limitations and mess. And that allowed me to have 20% reload speed and then also navigate rather quickly and change directions due to the 50% power of the Colossus. So, for instance, I also actually have it as the silo. It was running the Colossus engine with a plus 20% reload speed, as well as 6 spires, and it allowed me to navigate rather quickly, had a quick consent, whatever. But now that I need to replace that, I have. So other things on this build worth note, I reckon, is the fact that the Arothron only costs 4 energy each, so 8 total, and I'm trying to stay under the, cabin energy total. Is I totally lost my train of thought. Where I was going with the comment on the Colossus, actually, sorry, it's related to its movement speed. Alright, so by default, the Echo cabin goes a max of 70 kph. You do not get the benefit from Hans's Indomitable, which is getting the non-pack exclusive cabins the additional 5 kph if they're above the special tier. Likewise, the Yokozuna and the Machinist do not benefit from this as well, which kind of makes sense. Kind of, I mean, the more cabins we get that are, you know, Battle Pass or pack exclusive, the worse the perk is. But in any case, it worked when we only had 1 legendary cabin and then, you know, the 2 epic cabins. So that's the thing. You could argue that it's because these aren't Steppenwolf cabins, which makes sense because neither are these. But at the same time, I don't know if they're planning on changing it for if they end up ever introducing another Steppenwolf cabin, which would basically be guaranteed to occur if we get another non-limited time cabin, since Steppenwolf's is the heavy cabin people. I guess they could also do another scavenger one. But I think all of the... Oh, okay. I was going to say, I think all of the advanced factions are represented in these, but obviously that is not necessarily true with the Scavengers as well as the Nomads now. So, and I guess to be fair, the cohort was also limited time cabins. So I guess basically it's just saying it makes Steppenwolf cabins go faster, so hopefully if we get more Steppenwolf cabins in the future, it'll be add to that as well. So in any case, it's the fastest heavy cabin goes 70 kph, the Yokozuna only goes 65, likewise with the Icebox, and then everything else goes slower. In the case of the tank cabin goes 50, and everything else basically goes 60. So, with that out of the way, it's the fastest heavy cabin, although it does not gain the benefit of the Hans bonus, which puts all of the Steppenwolf cabins at 65 anyway, which is pretty close to 70. That means that if I slap on some movement parts, and I slap on the fastest engine in the game, it can go pretty friggin' fast, up to 84 kph. Now, of note though, the Yokozuna's ability, despite having a slower base cabin speed, is that you get increased cabin speed and power. So whilst the Echo can go up to 84 kph permanently, the Yokozuna can go up to 92 if you are A, not over tonnage, B, use the buff, and C, use a cheat engine. So for actual like chase down builds like this one, I just ended up using the Yokozuna instead. Plus it ends up going like 80 kph on the regular, which is pretty much close enough to the Echo in any case. So what that means is you can go pretty fucking fast. Now, because the Colossus was the engine of choice at the time, I was only looking at getting 75% or 75 kph, and as a result, using the quote-unquote bad hovers, the tonnage hovers, the heavy durable lifting hovers, however you want to look at it, were basically a choice because, you know, 75 kph is the limit, and even if I don't use those and I just have the... even without the speed limit of 75 from the hovers, I only get speed limit 75 for the Colossus anyway. So that is no longer the case now that I am using the Hot Red. So in some regards, that is pretty cool as a benefit. So it goes 13% max cabin speed bonus, which means that in theory, if I had the fast hovers, I would be able to go almost up to their max speed. So 79 kph on this build, and the speed limit for those hovers is 80% as of the newest update. So, sorry, 80 kph, not 80%. They also have lower power drain, which means I also suffer less from having a hot red engine rather than one that adds quite a bit of power. Now, the disadvantages, as you can also see here, is it has significantly less tonnage. So if I were using these, I would not be getting this much tonnage. I'd be basically getting half of that, which obviously encumbers the build. So, not as great in that regard, obviously, but obviously I can also just take off armor pretty easily, especially since APC parts are extremely heavy. So, not a huge risk in any case, but that is probably the other thing that I can upgrade on this build other than the discharger. Since I'm also primarily using this build specifically for the shotgun daily challenge, which I even have today, I normally just take off the fuel tanks. Can slap your raider back down. And voila, now for fighting bots I have a sub 8000 power score build that has decent reload speed, does a lot of damage if I'm in the Goldilocks zone, and also has wall hack radar for finding the enemies and cloaking for removing their locks on me. So yeah, pretty straightforward, pretty versatile build overall. So if I were to make this for the Yaoguai, pretty basic would be, because the Yaoguai costs 5 energy per, unlike the Orothron, which is 4. I would have to get rid of 2 energy, which in this case would probably just be the cloak and wall hack radar. And then I could do something like that, voila. So I probably pretty it up, might put on actual wheels other than Yaoguai. Haven't quite decided. If I did, I'd just probably do, Omnis. But in any case, I don't need to worry too much about doing a whole whack of changes for this build, because it's just jostling energy around and maintaining the reload booster and the echo cabin. So pretty straightforward. Like I said, pretty versatile. That's what I like about this build. It's pretty much the only hover build I actually use in missions, and those missions are still just patrol. So, but if I end up using the Yaoguai, it'll probably look like this, because using the School Kid Cannon is obviously somewhat not a good idea when I literally have an exposed cabinet module, since it's part of a fusion build, plus it's an art build, which means that I put a lot of form over function. So yeah, but in theory, if I did want to go this route, I could get like 79 kph if I used the hot red engine, meaning I could use the faster hovers, and or I could use like a cheetah engine, but the cheetah doesn't benefit these. The oppressor does, but if I'm using the oppressor alongside these, then I need to get rid of another energy point, so I would need to not use the reload booster, which is obviously not what I'm planning on doing, or using a generator. So that's the other option, since this does have quite a bit of a slow turn speed for the Yaoguai. If I were to do something like that, then, and again, mind you, I would use the other hovers so I get the full bonus of the oppressor, as well as get the tonnage bonus of it, meaning that I don't need to worry as much about the lower tonnage of the other Icarus. Then I'd be able to basically navigate rather quickly, turn the weapons as needed to address threats rather than their default normal turn speed, which is ridiculously slow, as well as maintain my as high as possible reload speed. So we'll see how it goes. It's going to basically depend on if this build is like viable at sub 9000, and if I feel like any of the additional rotation speed and or the wall hack radar, or if I just feel confident enough at sub 8 and just lobbing these in the general busy points, and or just using my eyes, seeing somebody shooting it, and then leave. So we'll see how it goes. Again, I might also not use, I might even like just slap on a big G and throw on a cloak, just so again I'm not as vulnerable when I'm off the mount. But yeah, that's basically it, I think, for what I want to cover for the drones. So we're looking at 1 hour, and that included rather large segues on the analysis of all of the drones. So I'm just gonna double check. I don't think I have anything else here to talk about drones specifically, other than Lamau, it's a school bus. Isn't that neato? Yeah, so that's my drone build. So I'll look at getting this chaptered, which reminds me I definitely did not do that on my prior videos yet, and then also uploading the Twitch videos, which showed all of the reload builds I had at the time, which includes some that I do no longer have on the exhibition or in my blueprints, just because those were ones from before the Guiding Star update and when the reload boosters were introduced. So I will hopefully get that uploaded sometime this week, and then voila, you have more content that I already actually posted but forgot to post onto a permanent hosting site. So hope you found that interesting.